Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 185, and we're going to be doing a look back at 2020. So, obviously, it's been a rough year for everyone, and we'll start this off with COVID and my, what happened with it for me. It was, for me, the COVID had several important effects. We being my wife and I, were planning on getting married in Denver with family and friends, and that didn't happen because of COVID. Early on, we had to look at it, and then we decided to cancel. It was just too dangerous. My dad was struggling with Parkinson's, and if he or my mom had caught COVID in their 70s, could have been extremely dangerous. They were trying to be very careful, and so are we. In fact, my wife, my son, and her boys, we're all trying to be very careful, and we have been for the whole year. So we had to cancel that. And we'll get around to what happened later, but the funniest thing for COVID for me is because I am not going and getting my hair cut, I have long hair for the first time in my life, and it feels very weird, but not bad, actually. I thought I would just kind of hate it, but it's actually been kind of fun in a weird way. I actually haven't touched my hair until this last week, so I haven't had a haircut. I think January I got one, like right before the poop, hit the whirling blades, and so it's been almost exactly a year since my last haircut, and I haven't really done anything to my hair except this last week. The bangs, such as they are, I have a pretty good bald patch on the back, on the top of my head, slash the back of my head. My hair it's receded a fair bit, but I still have hair in the front, but it's pretty high up. And so usually I just comb it back, and even when it gets a little long, it's not a big deal. It finally got long enough that it would not stay back, and it kept falling forward in a really ridiculous looking way into my eyes. And so this week, I took this electric razor I have, which is not really suitable for hair cutting, but I managed to just hack off my bangs until they're half the size they were, or something like that. And I feel a lot better, because it was getting really irritating having it flop down in my eyes and look absolutely ridiculous, because my hair was literally going out and forward. It was ridiculous. It was crazy. My hair is still kind of crazy, but I kind of dig it in a weird way. It's very 1700s, kind of long, long in the back sort of look. It's long everywhere. It's not a mullet, but in the back it kind of hangs down, and it's very Founding Fathers. It's very bizarre that way. That's the one interesting thing. And I've never had long hair. Like I say, I've never had long hair. In the 70s, I had a bowl cut. My hair was a little bit straighter back then for some reason. It's a little bit wavier now than it was when I was very young. I had a bowl cut, that my parents gave me when I was quite young. And that was sort of long-ish, but not really. And it's never been longer than that. So I've always had a very conservative haircut, and all of a sudden I'm long-haired, and it's very bizarre. It feels not exactly freeing, because I don't really care. In some ways I would be just as happy to keep it short, but I really I kind of like the wildness of it. My hair has always been sort of cowlicky, because it is a little wavy and so on. So I end up getting tons of cowlicks. And so having short hair is actually one way of dealing with it. But also, like, as soon as it gets even a little bit long, it just starts to kind of go in every direction. And so just having it long is kind of solves that problem, because it just gets so long that it just hangs down. And I didn't ever think of that as a solution before. Yeah, so I've got this founding father's hair now, and I'm very careful. If I go get food from like a drive-through, I'm wearing a mask. I wear a mask, and sometimes I even wear a face shield as well. I wear both when I go grocery shopping, because I do feel like grocery shopping is like the one place probably where I'm most vulnerable. Although quietly, the second most vulnerable place is because my wife's boys don't exclusively live with her. They also live with their dad, so half the time, roughly. There's obviously some risk there that, because I think they're being careful, sort of, but maybe not. And we hear stories, and it's like early on in COVID, like in March, but when it was known to be pretty serious, like the dad and mom went to, like, I think it was India. It was like, really? Wow, India? And you're going to come back and like travel during like COVID? And maybe it was even like April, like, when things had really taken off. So I'm not, it's hard to be 100% sure that the boys aren't going to catch it from something the parents do or whatever. But all we can do is, do our best. So, been pretty isolated for the year. I must say, though, that it kind of reminded me of like how isolated my life had gotten anyway. I mean, for years, in the early 2000s, I was working nights, hardly ever seeing anyone. And then watching my infant son during the day. So I saw my wife, I saw my son, and it was hard to see anyone else because, I was awake during the night. And so that was when my life sort of started to become a very online life. So maybe it's not too surprising that I ended up, with much of my social life being online. I do my podcasts, and I stream, and I do guild stuff, and it's very, it is sort of very isolated, and I have always sort of realized that. I do feel it. Even I do feel it this year, though. I mean, it's definitely a step up even from that. I'd say, activities I miss are probably like actually sitting in a restaurant. I do actually kind of miss that. And probably seeing a movie in person, simply because there's something about seeing a movie on the big screen that is different. It just hits you differently. And I think we're seeing that a lot of the reviews of, for example, which is a movie I haven't seen yet, although I have some interest in seeing it, is the Wonder Woman 1984 movie. And from what I understand, a lot of like how people are feeling it differently is like the people who see it in the theater are much more like forgiving of it. They have more fun with it. They're kind of blown away by the action and the set scenes and all that set pieces, scenes and all that sort of thing. Whereas the people who just see it on the small screen at home from the HBO, which is also available at the same time, and this is like pretty much the first time any movie has been sort of released this way. They're sort of seeing the flaws, and and they aren't being drawn in by the story and so on. So I mean, there is a difference, in seeing a movie in the theater versus seeing it on a small screen. Anyway, so other than the isolation, which, like I say, even I feel, and I was sort of, if anyone was sort of ready for it, I guess I was, because just the way my life is sort of set up, I had always been a little bit isolated. Even when I was working in in an office for the last few years before my wife died, you know, they were nice enough people, but it was all about work, and, you know, everyone had their own cubicle. Everything was sort of isolated there as well. It was, you know, it was difficult to make friends there. There were some nice people, and some of them I still see on social media and stuff like that, but that's about it. So yeah, I can't even imagine for like the people who are like truly outgoing and really like to be around people, like how difficult this has been. So anyway, so we canceled the wedding. However, we had by the time we canceled it, we had made enough plans, and we had it planned for September 15th. And the reason we had it planned for that day was it was the not the birthday, but it was the anniversary day, the wedding day of one of my grandparents, one of my sets of grandparents. My maternal grandmother and grandfather got married on September 15th during World War II. And I think we told this story when I did the interview with my parents as an early episode of CryptoBiography. But anyway, to recap it, they had met a couple of times, went on I think it was 2 dates, and the third time they ever met was at the church. And they got married. And because it was wartime, there didn't happen to be anyone there. There was a woman there who was just praying. They got married in their church, and the only other person there was a woman who was praying. Her husband was in the military already, and so was my grandfather. He was in the Navy. And so she was their witness, and it was them and the church leader. I forget what he was called. But yeah, so they got married on September 19th, and then it lasted until he died of cancer in, I think it was 1984 or 85. And yeah, so we decided to make it that day, and to sort of, you know, be sort of a family day, and it was very sweet. And we canceled it for Denver, but we decided to go ahead and keep it. We were going to do it over. We were going to do it live, but that ended up being a little bit tricky. My wife had moved into a new place, and we were, you know, the internet was working pretty well, but we just weren't confident that we would be able to live stream it and not have something go wrong. So we just recorded it using an iPad. And and the funny thing is, we had sort of sped up our wedding. Like, we'd been engaged for like a year, roughly, but we were really thinking of not having, you know, a wedding for at least another couple of years after that, potentially, because we weren't going to be able to live together. It's just too complicated to go into right now, but it's just very hard for us to like merge our households at this time. So the closest we got is, you know, she's now renting a place that's near me, and we get to see each other every day, and that's wonderful. But the plan was originally never to, you know, like have a short engagement and get married right away. Originally we were thinking, well, we'll be engaged a couple, 3 years. We'll get married when we can, you know, move in together. We moved it up because my dad was struggling with his Parkinson's, and especially once we found out that he also had dementia, which often comes with Parkinson's. Like, if you get Parkinson's, especially in your later years, very often you get dementia as well, and he had it, and it was going to be, at some point, it was just going to be impossible for him to be there mentally. Even if he was still alive, he you know, and we had the wedding, he just wasn't going to be, he wasn't even going to know it. So we decided to move it up, largely because of that. And 2 days before we got married, he died. And it was really, you know, it was unfortunate and really ironic that, you know, my dad, the reason we had moved up the wedding and he got so close, and then he was gone. And there was actually a moment there where it was like, do we put off the wedding? But we decided not to. There are practical reasons as well in our situation. Since I'm, no longer working, an office job, I don't have proper insurance. I have, I was getting insurance through the ACA. And, we both wanted sort of quote unquote real insurance for me and my son. And so that was one big reason. Another was with the unfortunate and extremely ugly rise of popularism in the United States in the Republican Party. There's been a lot of craziness just involved with immigration. And my wife has never tried to become a U.S. citizen, but she has had a green card since, I believe it was 2000. So, she's been working in the United States. Well, originally it wasn't a green card to work. It was just a green card because, they had moved down to the United States. Her then husband had a dual citizenship of U.S. and Canada, and they had decided to move down to the United States, for his work purposes. Eventually, she did get a working green card, and now she works for the city of Portland. They ended up moving back to Portland. Then they got divorced, but she's been working for the city of Portland for years now, like over a decade. And, but still, you worry, like with all the craziness that's going on with, with ICE and with the changes in immigration and with the insane, new beliefs that a lot of the people on the right, unfortunately, have. Who knows what was going to happen in the future. So that was sort of another concern. So we decided to not put it off. And it was, obviously a very sad time as well, but I'm still glad we did it. And it sort of made it one of the craziest weeks of my life. I mean, it's obviously sort of trumped by being, widowed. That's sort of like, even though that's one thing and not two things, it still kind of trumps things, as far as how big something feels. But still, the loss of my father was huge. Even though he'd had it, it had been a long time coming. It was just very sad, and the timing was awful, and everything. And then 2 days later we got married, and that was really wonderful, and it was really a bright spot. Like, I was surprised at how positive looking, the weeks after that I felt because of getting married. And yeah. Anyway, so it's been crazy since then. Like, mixing up the emotions between never being able to see my father again, being concerned about my mom and my sisters who live with them, and they all live together, basically to help him out. And then we did eventually very carefully took a plane, to go see them, and just not exactly have a funeral, because he didn't want that. He didn't want a memorial service, not a formal one, but we got together so that we could grieve together and share stories and make decisions, because of course anytime someone dies there's tons of things that have to sort of happen, and that was really sweet and very sad. And that was like right before, like, this is like October, and it's sort of like right before all the craziness happened. Like, like Halloween we saw a spike in COVID in the United States, and then it got really bad after Thanksgiving because like people just weren't being careful enough, and like even if they were otherwise socially distancing, they were also taking off their masks to eat. with family members that they're not normally around, and you just saw a spike, a pretty big spike after the U.S. Thanksgiving, and then and it's not gotten better, and due to the Christmas holiday, that's for sure. And we are just in a mess, man. So if you're listening to this like years down the line or whatever, if you happen to be someone who's just like happens on this like years down the line, yeah, the U.S. is a mess, and it's crazy that there's basically like one half of the population, roughly, almost, that just kind of refuse to go along with reality and just do anything to help people. It's absolutely insane. And it's bizarre that it's also, it's like one political party essentially, and it's because they get their news and their information from a source that has decided that they're going to be anti-science. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to being anti-science, and it's been an insane year. As far as CryptoBiography, I'm pretty happy with it. I really do enjoy writing the stories. I have long ago realized something about me, and that's like I have a hard time doing creative writing unless there's a real incentive, I need accountability, essentially. So like the few times that I've written like long creative works in my life before CryptoBiography, I basically told someone, a friend, usually, okay, I'm going to like start creative writing, and I'm going to send it to you every week for you to read. And it didn't really matter to me whether they actually read it or not. The point was that I was accountable, and like they were expecting me to send them something on a regular basis, and I needed something to be able to send them. And that's kind of the only way I got several, longer things written, or just regular things written. And then I decided when I decided to make CryptoBiography a creative writing podcast, that it would, that was going to be my accountability, essentially. And so thank you for listening, and I appreciate it, because just having an audience means that I know that I'm going to write, because I'm not going to get on one week and just say, okay, I wrote nothing, see you next week. You know what I mean? Or just not put out an episode. This is sort of a weird one. I do occasionally do these like little catch-ups, or if I have a bit of news, I do a podcast about that. So this is one of those weeks. But basically, it has kept me writing week in and week out for, let's see, this is episode 185, and I think it was episode 63 that we made the change. So 120 episodes. So that's over 2 years since I've done one every single week. And that's great, and I'm really pleased with that. I'm pretty happy with the stories that have come out. Like some of them are in the Connections continuity, as we call it. Some of them are just standalone, and I'm pretty happy with both kinds. I've written in several different genres and styles. Some of them are a little sort of Twilight Zone-y. Some of them, some of them are not. I've always had sort of a bent towards writing sort of, eerie or weird short stories, sort of in the Twilight Zone sort of bent. But I've also written some just very straightforward stories as well. And some of them are not, a few of them are even not like fantasy fiction, they're not like in any sort of fantasy, sci-fi, or other sort of non-reality based trope. There's a couple of stories that are just stories, and that's really fun too. Anyway, I hope you are enjoying CryptoBiography. I hope you're staying healthy. Please stay safe. I'm glad that the vaccine has just started to be delivered, although ineptly. Like, we're way behind where we should be by now, but whatever. I mean, what do you expect from from an administration that actively like undermines science at every turn? They're not about being competent. They're about putting sticking a stick in the gears. That's what they're good at, and that's what they're doing even when they don't mean to, unfortunately. So stay healthy until the vaccine gets to you and yours. I'll do the same. I'm not in any high-risk group, so I don't anticipate being able to get it right away, so I'm going to just keep safe as much as I can, and I hope you do the same. So stay healthy, folks. I'll get back to the creative writing, and we'll get back to the story. And this is an old Western story. I think I did one other sort of story set in a Western setting for CryptoBiography. This is like the second one. And I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And I sneeze right at the end. All right. Well, I'm not sure if I'll edit that out for the audio version of the podcast or not. But in any case, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Words and music, copyright 2020 CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical. I don't know why I'm saying that, because this is not a fiction episode, but hey, there we go. Thanks for listening.